So apparently Wonder Woman is queer. Now I'm not by any means someone who's actually going to get into the sort of Tumblrific sort of notions of things. I'm just flat out not qualified. I'm a straight white male over 30. What I am going to address is probably the biggest question I've had since they announced that she was queer. Who the hell cares? I've spoken to people who are Wonder Woman experts, I've spoken to people who are comic book experts. Every single one of them sends to weigh in and have some sort of issue, something to say basically about Wonder Woman and this new big revelation about her sexuality. But I literally can't get over the hurdle of who the hell cares? For me, a character's sexuality throughout any fucking comic book could mean so very little to their character that it's almost ridiculous to ask the question. If Bruce Wayne turned out to be gay, sure, there'd be some rumors in the paper about him and Robin, but would it really change anything he does? Would it change the motivation of his character? Would it change what he does? No, it wouldn't change anything. So that's Batman off the table right there. Let's say the Flash is actually identifies as mayonnaise, or a tractor, or whatever the fuck he wants to identify as. Would it change him from being the Flash any way, shape, or form? No. Doesn't do it for Green Lantern, doesn't do it for Cyborg, doesn't do it for Doctor Strange, doesn't do it for Captain America. Who cares? All these characters and their sexualities and their genders literally don't factor on their character at all. Now, of course, this is a very easy argument for me to actually sit back and ask because I've never had my sexuality not represented. I can understand how this representation is extremely important to so many people who have felt underrepresented in different forms of media out there. Sure, it's one thing to have it actually confirmed and to go like, okay, I guess all the evidence was pointing towards it, and yes, alright, she is queer. That makes total sense. And that's actually an argument that I fully support. I'm all for Wonder Woman being confirmed as a queer identity. It makes total sense. She's the daughter of Zeus, she lives on an island full of women, men kinda don't really do anything for her one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. She's had relationships with both as sisters, both as lovers, both as brothers, as cousins, whatever. She's a god, she's a Greek god at that, and let's be honest, if you look at the mythos of Greek's history, it's kinda fucked up. But aside from addressing an underrepresented sexuality, what actually is the biggest deal for everyone complaining or going for the fact that her sexuality has been confirmed? I think it's born from the fact that we like to see ourselves in a lot of the characters that we admire. And this may be controversial, but I think a lot of us aren't really mature enough to have that iconic imagery challenged. When we see a character like Wonder Woman or Superman or Batman, any of the trilogy, any character anywhere whatsoever, it could be anyone in the world. But when we identify with these characters, we imprint ourselves upon them. And of course, when that identity is challenged, we feel that our identity can be challenged. It's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to these things. We live vicariously through these characters because of our desire for fantasy. And when that fantasy is challenged for how we see ourselves in these characters, to feel like we no longer can see ourselves as a part of them due to it challenging our either personal ideals or our personal representation for ourselves, we tend to fly off the handle on things. But I'm going to be honest, I don't really class myself in the we. I mean, I'm not jumping on keyboards, I'm not reading about Wonder Woman's sexuality or Green Lantern gay wedding or any of these sort of major societal shifts which are finally being represented in comics, and then jumping on the keyboard and talking about sending death threats and how I want to kill myself because of all different sort of things. It doesn't make sense to me to actually have that reaction, because I guess like the quiet majority of us, and I stress this, the quiet majority of us, we can just sit back and enjoy the comics and the characters for what they are. Sure, we like to see ourselves in these characters, but we can take bits and pieces of what we are. There was a recent meme that actually came through where everyone was asked to describe themselves in 3 different fictional characters. I, for one, was nearly every single character from Parks and Recreation. But in the very same bracket between that meme going through and everyone choosing 3 characters they felt represented themselves, this news of Wonder Woman broke and people still all lost their shit as if it was the only possible way they could ever identify themselves as some sort of character. Now, fair enough, I might be speculating as to people's actual beef with this, and sure enough, I'm no expert by any means. I don't think any of us have the full story on any of us. But it's important to ask the question and to add the speculation and have the discussion about this. Why was it so important that we now know that she's queer? Why now? Why confirm it now and not before? Was the world not ready for a queer Wonder Woman? And if so, why did they always used to write and represent her as a queer Wonder Woman? If that's the argument that they're actually making, how can you say that now was the perfect time to actually say it when not 20, 30 years ago? I think people forget about Wonder Woman when she was originally actually drawn and represented. She had the cuffs, she had the rope. It was very bondage-esque kind of S&M-y sort of style, and there's a lot of articles that lend into this sort of artwork and representation of how Wonder Woman originally came out. She was a domineering force on men, and it played into that fetishism and that fantasy for men who were the largest demographic of comic readers at the time. Now, the representation from that, how Wonder Woman has grown, has left her old versions of herself absolutely in the dust. But I don't think you can say the sort of Old Testament version of the character is allowed to be forgotten, but then say that this section since is only the bit we're going to concentrate on. I think it's important to understand a character, you need to look at their entire development over time and see how the character has grown. And again, I'm no expert on Wonder Woman by any means, and I yield to the experts to actually inform me and let me know about stuff I should know about this. But the discussion I put forth to you guys and that I've been having with myself is outside of representation, why is a character's sexuality so important? Because for right now, for me, it's just not. Bottom line, I don't really have answers, but I really am seeking them. The one thing I actually do want to stress more than anything in the world though is, as a creative myself, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that anyone would fly off the handle about any twist in a character's plotline or development. Sure, I understand that we have this ownership and we feel these are a part of our identity, and I even talked about it in the Ghostbusters video about how these characters in our history and these works of fiction that shape who we are in our formative years become these extremely important pieces of our identity, and in many ways can feel like they're robbing our childhood. Though I absolutely would love to say that I can understand where people are coming from, it's just for me, the gender and sexuality of a character has never really mattered, and never more so than in comic books, so I guess that's food for thought.